Welcome everybody to another Legal Tech Talks. I am delighted today to bring another insightful and innovative session. And today we've got a couple of really exciting individuals to be speaking with. And firstly, I will be, let me start again. So we're going to be looking at a more of a conversation with John O'Donovan from Allen & Overy, and also with Colette Kitterhing from Riverbed Technologies. Now, with today, what we're going to be looking at is very much having an agile law firm has never been more essential. And during a time when technological landscape is shifting continuously, building a resilient infrastructure and preparing for failure is paramount in this time. Now, before we go into the session, and I introduce the speakers and a bit more of their backgrounds, what I want to do is also highlight to everybody, you can get involved. So please, if you've got questions throughout this session, which will last about an hour, please either put it through the chat, raise your hands so we can bring you in live, so you can actually interact with John and you can interact with Colette and ask your question, or put it through the Q&A at the bottom. And again, we will raise it, I will raise it live with John and bring in your question that way. So I'm delighted to have John, who is the CTO of Allen & Overy. Previous to that, he was the CTO at the Financial Times and at Wall Street Journal, building technology and data solutions to fundamentally change digital reach and drive subscription growth, as well as being the chief architect at the BBC News and Sport and Talk. Now, Colette Kitterhing, who represents Riverbed, she brings with her over 20 years experience in the IT industry. So before taking the regional leadership role at the beginning of 2020, Colette joined Riverbed in 2019 to lead the UK financial sector sales team. She joined Riverbed from Nectar Services, where she was Director of Sales for Europe and Africa. Prior to Nectar Services, Colette held leadership positions in sales and operations at multinational technology service providers. So welcome both of you today to Legal Tech Talks. And I'm delighted to have you both. Just to let everybody know, we'll be having a discussion with John for about 25 minutes, and then Colette will be drawn into the conversation as well, and we'll be opening it up, the Q&A to both. So John, I'm delighted to so welcome first of all to your first Legal Tech Talks with us, and I'm delighted to have you today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I wanted to have a look at the, you know, this is a really unprecedented time for law firms at the moment. And looking at the agile, people talk about agile law firms a lot at the moment, and also a huge amount of going through a lot of change internally as well as externally. So John, looking at the kind of the crisis we're in, how can this potentially give opportunities to firms? What do you see from this in coming in?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting time to arrive in the legal industry. So, I mean, I've been in it for about a year and a half, and people told me it was not quite as frantic as it clearly is. And I think even before the crisis, there's a lot of frantic activity, especially around technology, or lots of stressing about what is the right solution, how can technology help, how do you change the process. So I've really enjoyed being in it, but that's because I like a bit of frantic activity, I suppose. And I think that the crisis at the moment is doing something really interesting. It's probably creating a bit of disruption. And when I've worked in industries that have genuinely been disrupted. So, for example, at the FT, you're at a point where essentially there's a profound change in customer behavior. So, and that I would describe as one of the things which describes a disruption. So lots of people think they're being disrupted, but they're not really being disrupted. It's the real change comes from the profound change in the way that you're affected by external circumstances. So with the media industry, it was people stopped buying newspapers or didn't buy as many newspapers, and how do you deal with that scenario? So now the crisis that we're in also is a similar way you can draw those sort of analogies through. So what do you do in this sort of crisis? So at the FT, for example, we really focused on the data and information which we had and what we could glean from using the internet in an age when we were just really starting to get to get our heads around what digital publishing really meant, and starting to progress those models, building models for mobile publishing, etc. And as you start to look at it, you see an opportunity in that disruption. You see a change, which is, so they may be buying less newspapers, but actually you have an opportunity to grow your digital reach in a fantastic way on a global scale. And now the target we set ourselves was to reach 1 million subscribers for the FT. And previous to, I guess, the digital revolution there, we had never really gone above 450,000 subscribers. So you start to see that there is opportunity. It's just in the mindset and how you think about the way that's presented to you, and the way which you're prepared to adapt and listen to the information that's coming at you from various different sources.
You talk about, obviously, the customer behavior. What do you see for this, where looking at the firm you're with now, Alan and Overy, and what you're doing with team-wise, how do you think this has changed and presented opportunities for yourself as a business? Obviously, bearing in mind you may not be able to give too much away on some respects, but what do you see for this for yourself and your team now?
Yeah, so we've done quite extensive reviews of the technology we're using and how to improve the process. Also within our LegalTech area, we've been through each of our main practice groups and tried to understand the process there as well. We see lots of opportunity coming through to the LSC, our Legal Shared Services Centre, so we can start to, I guess, look at automation, look at capabilities to make more efficient make more efficient processes, and how we apply them to particular matters as well. So there's a lot of opportunity you can see around the process. I think it's how we start to industrialize this or start to scale it up is probably the biggest challenge. The thing that I was interested in coming into law was just understanding how do you start to mature these processes to a point where you can really take advantage of them, and look at the overall framework you need in order to put it all together. So, and that leads to a number of different new opportunities, and I guess the way you can see new services coming, things that maybe adapt or build on top of what you've already done. So we use a variety of products to do that, and some of which I'll talk about in as we think about legal tech and so on. But what that all means and how we start to build on top of that as well going forward.
Now, I know you've got a strong view in terms of technology and legal tech, and this has been an ongoing debate in the legal community for a while. What is legal tech to you?
I think it's interesting. It's interesting how you look at innovation and how you think about how you integrate that in a better way. So I'll maybe show a slide here just to give you a point to talk around, or an overview of the sort of problems we've seen in the past. There, where you can see that, okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is what we call the wriggly worm diagram. So that is its technical name. Now, if you look at the various companies we've worked with, and some of them have come through Fuse in particular, there's a number of different points where we've looked at how can a technology product help us, and how does it help us at different stages? How do we start to understand how we can start to take advantage of the efficiencies and the automation we can take from these tools? And these have all been useful to us, and these are companies we work with. Some of them have been through Fuse. I think that the key thing is, especially one of the great things about Fuse is the amount of effort and time we put into it in order to grow these companies. So they come in and work with us, but we do closely work with them on their roadmaps and start to think about how they structure themselves and how they heal best for the lawyers. So we spend a lot of time with them, and we give them lawyer time. The people who run Fuse in particular are very good at doing that. So we really focus down on where and how we can use these tools. But essentially, they're just technology. Legal tech isn't something special. It's not something different. It's just technology. It's just moving at a different pace to the to the way people have viewed technology in the past. So certainly within corporate IT, you know, can have a reputation for being slow. And I think one of the key things when you're looking at this is how do you start to build on top of this process. So as you start to scale these things out, you see there's quite a lot of companies on there, quite a lot of different products we work with. And there's more than this. This is just some examples. But suddenly you enter into a different problem of scale. So how do you connect these pieces together? So how do you understand how to work with these different companies in a way that's not very disconnected? So you're moving data between different systems, you're moving, you're looking at, I guess, particular processes that are required to log in or out of different systems. So it's how do you smooth over this process and find a way to connect it more. And this is where now I work very closely with our LegalTech team and the head of technology there. And this is very important to us. We think about what's the right way in which we can connect the pieces up and think about what's the overall framework we need in order to make this a more slick experience.
So looking at the tools, you know, you've talked about some of the companies which you work for. How, from your view, and coming in and also in the function which you are, how can tech become a catalyst for legal delivery transformation, do you think? Especially in this current market, take into account views and what you've been doing as a firm. Yeah,
so I think one important thing is to think about what are you actually making here. So you're not really building products, and I've come from a world where there's a fine pedigree of looking at product management, but it's that there's something else going on here, because it's more of a service view you're taking, which is probably apparent to most people, but I think it is really important to think about that, because it's not just technology, it's a combination of technology and experience and knowledge. And if you take machine learning tools, for example, they don't automatically create magic. There's no way around some of the hard work that's required, or some of the ways you have to train those tools. You have to give them specific focus. And often when you think about machine learning tools or AI technology, it can be quite narrow, and narrow in machine learning terms means they're good at doing one thing. So a chess playing computer isn't good at playing football. You know, that's a very extreme example, obviously, but there are many computers that are good at playing football. But you know, the point is the way in which you train things, the way in which you apply them, is something that you have to take care of, and you have to think about the quality you get back from that process, and what does the review look like. So it's more than just plugging something in and then letting it go. There's a service to build around this, which is quite important, and it's fundamental to the way in which you use the technology. So how do you think about the way it integrates into some often very complex processes?
And sort of looking at the kind of processes, you know, I believe, you know, yourself and many others sort of within the kind of peer groups have been balancing quite a lot in terms of pressure from, you know, internally as well. How, if you have a look at your role, do you feel it's shifted somewhat over the last 4 months because of, I suppose, the pressure from work from home, more of the digital footprint, and especially getting everybody in online now? Do you think that has changed your kind of your role, and in terms of the people piece as well, culture?
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, it makes things easier. In some respects, it makes things more terrifying. So, we had to, I suppose, create the virtual law firm from Overy out of a series of actions and events over 48 hours to look at how do we all work from home, but not in a normal business continuity example. What if you can't just get into the office? No one can get into any office. You know, there's a large number of people being excluded from central London, for example. So what do you do in those scenarios? And I would say to a large extent, it makes things easy to make decisions. So you can push things through that otherwise would be much more difficult to do in a normal circumstance. I think that there is a really key point there around the way that people work. So obviously collaboration tools, things like DocuSign, are suddenly much easier to progress. There's less reticence to using some of the tools because there is a necessity to use them. I think video conferencing is probably the classic example. So when we look at the way you use video conferencing, the interesting thing is people are finding, not everyone finds this, I will caveat this, but a lot of people are saying they're finding it easier to have meetings because people tend to be late less, people tend to be more focused. And anyone who's done a whole day of video conferencing will tell you how intense it feels, even though you feel like you haven't moved out of your chair, but it feels particularly intense. And what's really interesting is as you go back into the office, well, how are people going to do meetings in the future? Well, essentially our plan is going to be, unless you really need to have a room, do the video conference from your desk, because why would you all take the risk of all getting together and any danger of mingling and infection, that infection spreading. So you think about things differently, because then you think, well, why am I coming to the office anyway? So what's the point? What's the purpose? And you do tend to use the tools differently on that basis. And people can, there's other interesting things around where you recruit, because obviously all the barriers are somewhat loosened around where you recruit from and how people join meetings in various different locations. It's less of a barrier. I mean, our senior partner described this rather well. So there's sort of a macho attitude about how you come into the office, and I think you have to think about what that looks like in the future, and knowing that it's okay when people are not in the office for whatever reason. So there's lots of opportunities that do open up, even with some of the simple collaboration and some of the technologies which we use in that context.
Touching on looking at collaboration and looking at obviously the technology and what you're sharing with us on the screen at the moment. Have you found innovation has increased within your teams in the sense of idea flow with you and adoption of systems? Has it been smoother, easier to be able to embed that and to be able to move things forward?
I think there's definitely a demand and more ideas coming out. There, some of this is slightly, slightly masked for us because we just deployed iManage as a DMS. And we were doing that through the pandemic, which was quite challenging in setting it as a set of circumstances. So it was a big change in the middle of a major global catastrophe. So I think what's interesting is as people have thought more about what does that mean, though, they're thinking more about, well, how could they use these tools in a different way? So we've barely deployed some of the new tools, and people are already thinking quite imaginatively about how could we use them differently. So you've got obviously you've got Teams, you've got various collaboration tools. You have in the corporate world, you've got some of the big deployments of technology like iManage, and then you've also got some of the smaller products as well. There's more of an understanding of connectivity across those pieces, which is coming out, and there's lots of discussion around that.
Have you found, looking at the kind of the spread and where you are globally, have you found supply chain disruption? Do you feel that will become easier for you sort of going forwards, or have you been able to sort of manage that and overcome for yourself?
We've seen less of that, I would say. I think there's obviously there are other issues that come out. So how do you deal with printing, for example, and how people use consumables? That there's various issues to think about. But I think it's important to not paint a broad brushstroke across the global issues. So obviously, in different parts of the globe, some people are back in the office. Obviously in London, people are not back in the office, though the office is now open, but we're not encouraging people to go in. So, and when you look at different parts of the world, they have different attitudes to how they use the office and what they want to get out of going back in as well. So, there's no single path, you would say, globally, which is the thing that's driving that sort of change. I think what we're seeing is more general demand for a more appetite as well for for the change. So, you know, a lot of people are really quite happy with the level of change we've got through, despite the challenges that are against us. So, you know, they've adapted to that in a fantastic way, and people some of whom who've never worked extensively at home before have managed to cope with these scenarios and find ways to work with their colleagues. There's so many imaginative ways people are using using props in meetings. You know, you find ways in which you bring some life back into those discussions, because it can be difficult doing WebEx all the time, especially when you not necessarily seeing enough people. You don't see how those interactions work with your other colleagues, so you find ways to do that.
And I mean, looking at kind of the interaction, I mean, the biggest key, I think, for many is data. You know, when we have a look at the legal sector, the biggest asset for any law firm is the data they hold, you know, their clients. Do you feel that there has been more progress in the sense of automation? I know Alan and Overy have been at the forefront of quite a lot of, you know, innovation tools like Fuse coming out quite early. But looking at yourself, where do you sit with regards to the kind of data strategy for yourselves, for the firm? And looking
so I mean, I'll show my other slide. So if we look at, this is a view of our key, my key strategy. I'd say mine, but it's not really mine. It's, you know, this is the combination of the people. It's
very well put together.
Yeah, no, it's. You know, there's lots of input from lots of people here, which I would say I'm the conduit to bring this together in terms of things we need. But essentially, there are three key parts to it. So one is around, you know, simplification of services. There's lots of areas where you can see, you know, technology sprawl. I would say there's lots of products doing similar things. There's a lot of different things you have across the globe, which you need to try and consolidate. So a particular example was, one of the things we ran out of that area was around our network. So the global network that runs across all the offices and data centers. So we had a number of different suppliers, and we consolidated that down to one, and that saves a significant sum operationally, but it also creates new opportunities for how we then start to look at the way we use the network and the way we look at our data centers. So, you know, trying to understand what things you can simplify. It's not always as easy, because there are reasons why you have more than one product. But it is important to try and focus and just have less sprawl, because certainly one of the lessons that comes out of the crisis is, if you have lots of sprawl, those are the things that don't work. When you try and get everyone to work from home, then the many different systems become exponentially difficult to make them all work, to find out what's going on when people are trying to use these systems remotely. So, you know, it's interesting what a business continuity plan starts to look like, because part of the business continuity comes back to source. You know, just how do you get everyone working in very complicated ways from home? Well, you just make it less complicated to work from home. Now, that's very, very simple, but it is quite important to focus on that. And the reason for doing that is to try and create the space to look at the other two parts of the strategy. So one is around data. Yeah. We have 4 key silos that we're focusing on. So that's across people, money, clients, and work. And how we look at the data in those silos is really our fundamental process at the moment. We're trying to understand how we effectively and efficiently create an end-to-end view across these different silos and try and get them more connected. There are other places where we have data, but these are the ones that we've identified. So we start to look at how we can start to use this as a data strategy going forward and make significant difference from it. And the reason for doing that is because obviously we want to power our client services. So we're trying to build intelligent and seamless services across. Certainly within LegalTech, we've got 3 key portfolios that we're looking across. So there's A&O Manage, A&O Automate, and A&O Review that are the notional titles of those different areas. And these reflect a number of services which we're trying to present and look at how these are, I guess, rather than being a number of different disparate different ways of managing matters. We're trying to consolidate some key focus areas and portfolios that allow make it easier to see what it is we're offering and how we can help.
No, thank you, John. I mean, before we move on, because I want to sort of go into the kind of what the considerations for barriers to change, what you're facing with teams and sort of on the kind of global scale and the differences. Colette, I'm going to bring you in because I know that you've also got some good insights with regards to data and the management on this process. So if I can bring you in, and then what we'll do is we'll open it up for questions and continue sort of the discussion with regards to data strategy as well.
There's been some really interesting insights. I wanted to, also bring in where Riverbed come into this. Really, we're as an organisation, we're very much responsible, not responsible for, but focus on ensuring that organisations get the most out of their network and get the optimal application performance. It's really, our mantra is all about getting networks and applications to work better together. So really interesting to hear, John's insight, obviously more from the business side and the applications that you're using, but also, there's almost the underlying plumbing that needs to make sure that it all works as well, which might not sound too exciting, but it's kind of critical. And I'll probably get told off by our marketing people by calling it plumbing. So I just got a couple of slides which I think might help frame the picture a bit, and also add a little bit more insight into what we've seen in the industry, the wider industry, and some of our customers. So I think linking in from what John was saying, there's disruptive technologies, be they disruptive, or is it just the way in which the world is moving forward? Before the changes that we're all thrown with earlier in this year, we can all agree that cloud, IoT, mobile, they're all sort of pushing forward the whole digital innovation, digital transformation story that we've businesses are focused on. And this is something that will continue to be a main driver in technology strategies. But with that, what we see is it creates complexity. And again, when you're trying to drive change, this is quite often what causes challenges in the background. Is the world has become far more complex. Gone are the days where applications were delivered from a premise-based data center, across an MPLS network to users in a branch office. This was already changing, in that now that your applications, you may not know where your application is. It may be premise-based, it may be you're in your own data center, it might be in a cloud, a SaaS service. And now your users also can be pretty much anywhere. They can, be in a branch, and then the increase of the nomadic user was already a key challenge really before COVID came along. So this is really, some of the challenges that we're seeing our customers and their IT organizations having to deal with every day. The complexity is getting more, and the user expectation and the experience is also becoming more demanding. We expect service, we expect performance. Be it as consumers or within our enterprises, we expect fast and easy delivery of applications. And then this happened, obviously, and I think some of these figures for me sort of really drove it home, that if you look just at the Fortune 500, that's 30 million users, 30 million people were told to go and work from home pretty much overnight. This created quite a big challenge, to say the least, and the large majority of organisations hadn't got plans in place to be able to enable 100% working from home. As John mentioned, business continuity plans were, what if you couldn't get into one of your offices? What if some people can't get to an office? It generally wasn't put in place for what if no one could get to any office. So it caused a huge amount of challenges. But now we're starting to come out of some of the lockdowns, and again, it's different in different regions. We're not seeing amongst our customer base, and also as Riverbed as an organisation as well, we're not seeing everyone decide, okay, we're just going back to how things were. I think again, regionally, it's slightly different, but we are looking back to say, well, who goes back to the office. We've now realised after 3 months all working from home that we can all be productive, we can all carry on. Not everyone maybe wants to go back to 5 days in the office. So as we're seeing, our customers also saying, okay, we need to think differently about how the future is going to look. And with that is driving some technology decisions as well. And some of the key points that we see is really visibility. If we come back to the very high level sort of picture of what a network can look like as a combination of premise-based, cloud, hybrid cloud, office, remote, more and more of the network is now becoming outside of your domain almost. So having visibility, end-to-end visibility from the end user to the cloud or to the application is becoming more and more important to help you get the data around the performance, around potential issues, to be able to give you the empirical information to ensure that you can make the right decisions. And also when there are challenges, make sure that you understand where they are and how you can address those. I think we've all experienced over the last 3 months possible unreliable performance, and I'm not having to go at anyone's network teams here, but we all suddenly work from home, and I think in those first few days of working from home, pretty much every collaboration tool on the planet was oversubscribed, and you had connectivity issues. And I think again we've all been challenged with bandwidth constraints. We're all, if you are a nomadic worker, and again this is going to continue, it could in the future, it maybe you're working from trains and Starbucks and places like that as well as home. We're fighting with Netflix and Minecraft and everyone else on your network. So again, performance can be not only just at the application, but we also have bandwidth constraints that are coming back again, and that we need to understand that the new normal for this. The complexity of that underlying network as well can be restrictive on the agility of the organization. You want to innovate, and you want to innovate quickly, but the more complex, again, as John was saying, if you consolidate, if you make it simple, you can innovate faster. And there is a lot of complexity still there, which can cause challenges. And there is also the expansion of security risks. More devices accessing the network from remotely is also another area that needs to be thought of and addressed. And unfortunately, the bad guys out there haven't taken a day off either since the change in the world happened. So I think what an interesting statistic that we saw was right at the beginning of the European lockdown, Gartner did a snapshot poll and saw that 54% of the HR leaders indicated technology to be one of the main barriers to having an effective remote working policy. And I think if you look at, it'd be interesting to see when they do the next poll, as in such a short period of time, this forced change has seen innovation actually, and seen change driven through an unprecedented event, at speed that we've not seen before. It's be that, like you mentioned, with DocuSign, or be that with other policies for remote working, the change has been quite significant, and the speed of change. So it's like, how do you see these challenges within your organization? We've now come through this first phase, and we're now seeing, my customers quite often, we're like, okay, we've gone through the panic stations, we've got everyone working, but now we need to really manage this on an ongoing basis. We need to be able to ensure that we can manage our bandwidth, we understand the end user experience, we understand where you've got application performance issues and bottlenecks, for example. One of the key ones again is, are your users still experiencing application performance issues? Again, collaboration's here to stay, collaboration tools are here to stay, but they are latency sensitive. It's if you have an issue with your collaboration tools, you know about it because you can see it and you can hear it, but they also use up a lot of bandwidth. So how do you make sure that you're being more effective with the use of your bandwidth, or making sure that you have the correct application performance? How are you managing, from a security perspective, if you have all your users coming through on VPN connections, is that causing a bottleneck? So all these questions are being raised now, and to find a longer term solution to make sure everyone is more effective. And that really, from Riverbed's perspective, and I'm not going to go into any technical slides, so everyone can relax for a second. You know, just to sort of, all I want to leave it with is that this is, from our perspective, this is where we come in. We feel, you know, our portfolio is designed very much around providing a unified visibility, network performance management, be that from the user all the way through to the application. A key, again, simplify by providing end-to-end, and simplify by ensuring that tools are integrated and that you can see from all perspectives. So I think that is an absolute key, a key message, and it has to be irrelevant of where your application is. It's got to be, you know, premise-based, hybrid, you know, because this complex network is not something any organization can change overnight. It takes time, and so therefore we need to work with you and make sure you have that visibility over that transition time, and then make sure that the network that you have, the network that is delivering the applications, which ultimately is key to your business, and they are the business tools that drive your business, be they business applications and business legal applications and tools, or in other sectors, that they're getting the optimal performance. And that can be through optimizing the bandwidth that you have, which, you know, in a corporate network, sometimes you can easily increase bandwidth, but when you're suddenly working from home, that's not so easy. You're on contended home broadband, but also application acceleration as well, to ensure that where you have a cloud application, for example, you might not necessarily know where that cloud is. It may be the other side of the world, and that is going to cause performance issues potentially. So bringing these areas together between the visibility, understand the challenges, be able to troubleshoot quickly, but then also have something to help mitigate performance issues like that, optimization and application acceleration. And that is really what Riverbed is all about. And if you're a business user, you probably won't know about it. You'll just hopefully get a better performance. But if you're in the network side of things, this is how we look to make sure that we enhance the existing infrastructure and network that you have. So I will stop for a second there.
Thank you, Colette. It's interesting you talk about cloud and also security. And this is leading in, you know, with John, one of the pieces you were talking about, in the sense you mentioned briefly some of the looking at the structure and cloud. Have you found yourself moving more towards the cloud now during this time in terms of applications, or how has your processes, what were you doing previously to that? Did you have a kind of a balanced piece, John? And then also, Colette, it'd be interesting to see your view on your clients. What are you finding at the moment as well? John, are you there still? You're on mute.
Muted myself. Right, I'm unmuted now. So I'm not sure when you were muting me and when I was muting myself or unmuting myself.
I wouldn't be that rude. No, no.
So, well, it's interesting on this context. So one of the products we use, so I didn't, obviously when I agreed to do this, I wasn't aware that Riverbed were part of this, but one of the products which we've used is Eternity, which is one of your products there. And we've been using that to really understand better what's happening with the applications and what's happening on desktops. And we're seeing all sorts of information from that. And we use this along with a bunch of other data. So when obviously we were looking at any additional equipment we needed to buy, which there were quite, in some cases, there were quite large numbers of laptops or other things which we needed to do to make sure we were on top of the resources we needed to work from home. And it was one of the key things we used was to try and understand, well, which laptop should we buy? Which one's working best? Which one has the most issues? Which wasn't necessarily the newest. It wasn't entirely obvious. But there's much more advanced uses that we're now putting that data towards, looking at how we, I guess, look at different applications, from application crashes through to the things that are more usable data around how we understand productivity or other things we can start to look at. So there's lots of context around data and around this, which is, it's fascinating to explore. And it's been, again, the crisis gives a certain focus on some of this data gives a real edge to some of the data strategy. It's not the only thing we're looking at, but certainly it's one of the pieces that's really important to us and probably not so well understood beforehand.
Colette, how have you been seeing this sort of with the cloud adoption at the moment with regards to clients and what you're working with? Has there been a lot of challenges, or?
I think, you know, in the last few months, there hasn't been the cloud adoption's part of a longer term strategy that businesses have had. But I think what we've seen is obviously with the change in the way in which people are working, obviously mainly remotely at the moment, it has exacerbated some challenges maybe with performance. And so I think this has been one of the key drivers, especially in the early days, is helping to alleviate performance issues when users are no longer so much in their corporate network. And you know, some of the almost the older topics around bandwidth have come back to the forefront again. You know, I think that was a real challenge for home workers, and that is something that we've seen a lot of uptake and a lot of conversation. And similarly, like John's saying, is the visibility side, be that from an end user perspective or from within the network, is now people are really focusing on that to be able to understand the next stage as to how do plans adapt. So I think, you know, initially, yes, the first challenges was all about how do we improve performance for our end users, because we have to, you know, it's bad enough everything else that's going on, but you can't have it if every time you try and upload a document, you're sitting there looking at a swirling screen for minutes. And how can we improve that to make sure that the end user experience is better? And now is into a phase 2 is longer term planning, for which you need the visibility.
I think that workplace experience and I guess the continuous improvement of that is something which is a real focus now, and it's something which is understood better. That the context in which you're looking at your network has changed though, because you're not just looking at the hard shell environment of the office network. There's now a much more flexible view of, well, where does the business network end? So, and this is something for all organizations when everyone's working from home. So do you think about that extending out homes or into other offices, or where are people working from, and what do you need to do in order to effectively work across this scenario? So it's an ongoing and I would say a very challenging set of circumstances, and certainly with broadband itself and the ability to think about how people connect in, and the number of meetings where you find people slowly losing connections through the meeting. You know, it's really frustrating, and it can be very, very frustrating for people just on a personal level when you can't actually connect into the meeting, or there's a problem with the way you the way in which you can communicate and that, because people can't hear you. And I use that as a personal example because I've had particularly challenging broadband at times, and I've had to take some measures in order to improve the connectivity as well around my Wi-Fi. So it's something you need to consider, because it can be, again, just on a people level, it can be very frustrating.
What if you consider? I mean, looking at we talked about the kind of frustrations, but also there's an element of change piece here. What's kind of been the kind of barriers, would you say, for change with yourself, John, from your perspective, out with the firm, especially multi-jurisdictional as well?
I think, the barriers to technology being implemented, you mean in general, or?
Yes, so in general, but also looking at the upskilling. So with multi-offices, you talked about, didn't you, that some people are coming back in, others aren't. You're having to have this kind of spread and reaction.
I mean, it's interesting the way that people are viewing the process. So, I mentioned before around how people are viewing video conferencing. And one of the surveys we've done has shown that most people think they are as effective or more effective now than they were before, which is really interesting. It's possibly not what you'd expect, but they are. What it's putting pressure on is there's a pressure for an amount of change and a pace of change that I think this industry is not quite used to. So you look at things like Teams, or you look at mechanisms for scanning documents from home or other. There's lots of new technology and ideas popping up all over the place that you have to respond to quickly. So we know which video conferencing platform do you use. That in itself, I've lost a number of hours to that particular discussion. So there's all sorts of complexities in these discussions, and sometimes it's not only your choice, because sometimes you're asked to join conferences on other people's video platforms. Or the conferencing platforms are the ones that they prefer to use. So you have to have a very adaptable model. It's not. It's really interesting around the way in which you sustain some of the change as well. You can't really write rules that say you can only use this thing, because that thing may not work in half a dozen different circumstances, or it may not work in what works in Europe might not work in APAC. You've got to really think about that and just be a bit flexible.
And how have you found this, Colette, from yourself, from your clients' perspective?
Yes, it's similar. Different regions are responding in different ways, and obviously at different paces. For us, I think because of the nature of our business being a technology firm, maybe we are less regionally affected. I think it's more, you can see it in different cycles as different parts of the world are being affected at different times. But overall, it is driving that conversation with customers. They're all to varying effects looking at how the office and how the way of working is going to be long term. And this is, out in legal sector, but also across other sectors, it is going to change. Obviously, in some other sectors which are more location dependent, like manufacturing and things like that, it's having a very different effect, because there's a lot of focus on making sure people can get back. But it will be driving change, definitely driving change in technology strategies for sure.
And you mentioned that the key kind of part, sort of looking at entering back to work kind of strategy. Is this something which you're looking at now, John? I mean, how is that kind of being maintained? Because this is a big challenge, I think, for a lot of firms, especially in the legal, where data sits as well. Because we're going to be using HR to monitor people's data. You've got to take temperatures. You've got to change the kind of structure, don't you, internally with your teams? Are you facing this kind of decision and going through this process at the moment, John?
Yeah, I mean, the back to office strategy is one of the key forums that I'm involved with. I think again, that there is a global perspective that you have to be wary of. So, and there are different capabilities that are available in different locations. So tracking and testing is available in different capacity and different speeds in various parts of the world. So bearing in mind what things you need to do and what you're responsible for and your commitment to your employees, you have to think about everything from the way you use lifts, and we've been looking at one-way systems in the building, which I'm sure not everybody's going to like, around how if you find you suddenly can't get to, you turned left when you should have turned right, and suddenly you've got to walk all the way around the building. It's trying to deal with those sort of issues. I mean, meeting rooms and how you start to bring those back online is one of the challenges. I think it is interesting though. So WebEx says we use WebEx primarily, though we also use Teams as well, and we've engaged with different conference platforms, video conferencing platforms wherever we need to. But it has raised the expectation around how that process needs to improve. So people have got used to just firing up a meeting from their desktop. So what does that mean for when you go back to the office? And you look at a whole having to go to a room full of equipment in order to carry out your meeting, and whether people are in the office and who's in the office and who's not, and what the expectations are when people come to that room. So it has forced us in particular to raise our thinking about what does that need to look like going forward, and the collaboration tools we need is a real focus.
I mean, with regards to sort of changing the kind of structure, have you had to look for yourselves internally at the office and the kind of how that's going to be for yourself? now, because I think everyone is like implementing, aren't they, government directions in the sense of the spread, how that's going to be. Or are you sort of doing a little bit more similar to, on a smaller scale? Obviously, you've got Slater and Gordon, who completely took out their London office, but they only had 100 people which were there. So, you know, we're talking different scales here, John. So, but as an example, is that kind of consideration? I'm not asking you to give us too much, yes, this is going to happen moment, but what can you share with people, the kind of thoughts which you're having to do in your role?
I suppose when you think about the network, something implied from what I said earlier. So, do you take responsibility and build out the network more to people's homes? And there's all sorts of opportunities around that. So, it's something where 5G might be interesting for people who have poor connections or abilities, lack of ability to really connect in reliably. And that's another different way of looking at business continuity. So it is a key part of business continuity, providing broadband or providing leased lines or different ways of using those facilities. And then when you play that back, what does that mean for the office? So where is your equipment? Do you have equipment in the offices, or is it all in data centers? There's obviously issues about where you store that and how you start to look at the amount of space you need, because obviously every company is looking at evaluating their real estate options and what does that mean now for going forward and how we use that space. So do you look at obviously seating plans and the way in which people work when they're in the office and how they start to use the space differently is a real challenging set of scenarios to think about. But it's all it's quite exciting in a way. When you look at the opportunities that come from that are all massive, really. I've got
a point's been brought forward by Jonathan Coffey. I apologise if I pronounced your surname wrong. The key, he says here, key issue seems to be not the available tech per se, which may be difficult enough to integrate, and instead the senior management, especially the old school partners, being one barrier to change, and ultimately end user ability to understand and think and behave differently. Do you sort of agree with that kind of statement from Jonathan?
I think integration is a key word, because when you look across the different products and the way they interchange and the way that I guess data is shared across the different parts of your technology estate, is a fundamental challenge, and it's where you see a lot of lack of maturity in that process of how those things are managed. So to some extent, there's a number of points in the process where things clunk. They don't fit together neatly, and this is where when you're looking to present to partners and present them new ways of working, and they go, well, it doesn't really work in this scenario or that scenario. It's not very effective. And I think that can be a barrier to change. And it's often those are fair points. It should work better. It should be more integrated in a way that makes it easy to understand how to apply it to your particular work. It should be simple, but it's often not.
I think you have to be bringing a benefit to the end user. If you want to drive some change, they have to see the benefit, or it's just change for change's sake. It's human nature, and none of us like it unless we can see it's giving us something. So I think that is the key. I think in getting the end users to behave differently, I think we are partly all on a learning cycle as well over the last few months to adapt our behaviour, to understand how to work in a new mode. I mean, obviously, hopefully in the months to come, it will become a little less sort of 100% remote. But I think that is going to take a little bit of time. But I think where you are trying to drive change, you have to be able to show that it's got a key benefit, or it's just not going to fly at all. I think over this time we've implemented a few different things within Riverbed as well, from more of from a CRM perspective, and generally that's it's been seen as positive because it's integrating certain tools together, and it's making us have less places to duplicate data and things like that. So integration is key, because everyone hates having to go from one place to another, or worst case duplicate things.
The point on benefits that you make, Colette, is really important, because and this is the where many data strategies struggle. It's, you know, what's the purpose of it? What's the thing that you're trying to prove? And it can be difficult because it's, you know, when you're trying to sell the sort of investment you need in looking at data, well, it can be hard to define. It's a little bit intangible. I think one thing we did at the FT, for example, as an example, is you looked at how do you progress the model. Well, it's finding a metric you can use that means something to everyone, and finding a way in which you can understand, I guess, the particular scenarios that you're trying to deal with, and how do you measure them and improve them, which is often something which can be difficult to find around many of the products you use. And what's the metric, what's the thing it makes better, and then trying to follow that through and understand how that affects your process and your people and the skills necessary to configure these things to work effectively.
How have you found the kind of I am very conscious of time, and I thank you both. But John, with regards to senior management, and just looking at part of Jonathan's sort of point, which he sort of brought forward, I think one of the biggest struggles I think the legal community has faced is very much kind of like the pyramid model, which they've had, you know, where the partners and have a large say, so everything has to go through long processes in which to be able to be finalised. So looking at this type of model, have you found more flexibility coming in, John, since you've joined? Has there been a little bit more, I suppose, the ability to be able to move things through quicker? Mainly could be to do with the pandemic, or do you think that kind of decision process was already simpler for you because of the firm?
I think that there's an element of, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, you know, Fuse is not my invention, but it's something you can build on, and it's done particularly well. And certainly one of the best ways I've seen, and this is again is something I've done previously, but it's particularly well implemented in the way it's integrated into the business. So it's not a separate place where you go and do innovation. It's something which people feel a part of and feel they can contribute to. So it has a substantial effect. It's not something which just happens on the fringe of the business. It's something important. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for your input. Colette, thank you so much also with sharing Riverbed's views and what you're doing with your clients. And thank you for everyone who joined us. And I look forward to you all joining us the next one.